talked a little bit about chronic health challenges last time and also mental health. And we want to get a little deeper and more specific about mental health on this episode. So I thought it would be interesting for us to give a little bit more detail, a little bit more color around our experience with mental health. I think we gave more of a history of it, but maybe we can get a little more specific. I can start. I had depression essentially and anxiety since I was maybe in 5th or 6th grade.
Wow.
But really started noticing more symptoms junior high, where I was more like hardcore and suicidal and whatnot. But I want to just say and preface that our depression and our mental health, or whatever we're talking about, is not your mental health or anyone else's. I know it's all different. Everybody's different to some degree. And so the things we talk about today, I just feel like I'm going to talk about a lot of things and put out a lot of opinions, and I don't want people to think, oh, this means I can do that or whatever. You very well could, but I don't know if this is all going to work for everybody, and it's different. Everybody's got different experiences with mental health, but I do think there are some things that are scientific that I want to talk about. And I guess I want to preface with this, because when we start talking about definitions like depression, anxiety, like what that means is based on society's understanding and definition about it. And sometimes my definition and the commonly held definition are a little different, especially medically. There's some different ideas out there. And so I want to clarify, but I had depression, and it presented like, you'd read it in a, whatever the DSM says, or whatever that big diagnostic criteria that they use that changes every year. But I do want to get into more of how we understand it now, which is different than I understood it then. So I say all that to say that I had depression, I was suicidal, but there was more going on, I guess is my point, that I didn't realize. It wasn't just something in my brain. There's more stuff going on. I think I'm going to title this, I probably won't, but I do want to title this episode like "You're Not an Emoji," because I really do think our head can't be disconnected from our body. We are more than just, these little parts, of our, like, it's all connected. It's all this greater thing, the spiritual, the mental, the physical. So that being said, I struggled a lot of my life, and including up until present day, because now I have sleep issues, which probably were developing around that time, because I was pretty much fully developed around that time, physically. And I have an anatomical issue. Is that what you'd say? An anatomy? Yeah. Anatomical. It runs in my family,
right.
But I didn't know that. Sleep apnea and things on my mom's side, and my brother has it. And yeah, it sucks. And I didn't know that I was having sleep issues, because I was tired all the time, but I wasn't like waking up in the middle of the night. I thought you had to be 300 pounds or something more than that, and really overweight or something to experience sleep apnea. But yeah. I wasn't that overweight at all. I was actually not overweight at all, and was experiencing these symptoms all of a sudden, where I started waking up in the middle of the night and choking. And this was like 5 years ago. And that is basically like having depression, because you're not getting sleep, and it's like, and that's all connected. And so it's really interesting, although it's different in some regard, because it's not depression, it's presenting very similar, and it's kind of basically the same thing. And so that's a weird thing. So I feel like there's a lot of experiences I've had with mental health, but I think learning about the gut-brain connection and stuff we're going to talk about later helped me to better understand myself and get more help through dietary and lifestyle interventions mainly, but also different things, therapy, spirituality, obviously connecting with God and community and all the things help. And so I'm not trying to put mental health in a box, but I also am trying to just say how uniquely different everybody's experience is and how complicated it is in terms of all the definitions people use and how one might understand depression, anxiety, for instance. There's some misinformation out there. There's some things there's some narratives and some stigma, and there's just a lot going on. So I just want to preface and say these things, because do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
You've been wanting to jump in, please.
I just want to clarify. So your story with depression, as what we might generally speak of depression, kind of originated in 6th grade. That's when you started to recognize those symptoms of depression
around that
from
time.
Like a mental health perspective.
Middle school,
the way psychologists maybe diagnose depression in that realm.
Sure.
But then about 5 years ago, you're experiencing and are able to identify that you have sleep apnea, which manifests in similar symptoms to depression.
Right.
And so you've had this like long, and I know your story a little bit more, so I've heard the ups and downs, but you're kind of clarifying this experience of depression, both from like a psychologist perspective, but also, or what a psychologist might understand or interpret, and then also just from your day-to-day living perspective.
Right.
Okay.
And the interesting thing is that, like you pointed out, the sleep stuff started actually in my teens. And so at least so I thought it could have started earlier, but I think I remember a time where I didn't have brain fog. And then I remember a time where I did, and it was like my brain on a given day was just firing differently. And so there's clearly sleep involvement in my experience with mental health, and sleep issues have affected that, and I guess still affect that. But I did also get major breakthroughs, although my sleep somewhat wouldn't have changed because I hadn't done any interventions, nor did I know I had sleep issues. But different interventions, dietary, like I said, the spiritual stuff, the spiritual transformation I went through, the therapy, the diet, all of that really made a huge difference, because another piece of the puzzle in the gut-brain connection is I did have histamine intolerance, and basically I had chronic inflammation in my gut and in your body. And there is good evidence, and you could look this stuff up, and I'll give references and put some things in the show notes, but there's, experiments they've done with people where they inject somebody with some kind of inflammatory agent in their body, and
this is how they test it.
Well, this is just an experiment. They've put something inflammatory in someone's body through injection, and they present with depressive symptoms, because inflammation in your body is inflammation in your brain. Yada yada. So all I'm saying is this stuff's complicated, and it isn't. We now know, and this is settled science. And even though once things get told as truth, they still get purported as truth, even though the truth is actually revealed with science later, which is like this chemical imbalance theory of, you're just having a balance of chemicals in your brain, and that's why you have depression or whatever whatever mental health condition. And that's been disproven.
And that's what I heard growing up as well.
Well, and that's what a lot of people still believe, even though that's been disproven actually since like the 70s or 80s, I believe. But only recently was it then kind of brought up again in terms of being acknowledged as, that's actually not a thing. And not to say drugs and things don't have their place, but they, based on that theory or that evidence, there's more to the story, and it can be kind of a symptom relieving sometimes, but it's definitely not getting to the root of the cause, because the root isn't a chemical imbalance in your brain. So trying to take a pill that's going to fix that isn't going to get to that. It actually isn't a chemical imbalance. And if that's not the case, then then what is it? And so there's a lot of things that it could be. I want to steer people to the book Mind Fixers, which goes through the whole history. I can't remember the author. I can look it up or put it in the show notes. But Mind Fixers was a great book about this history. And then I think anything Georgia Ede talks about, she's an incredible psychiatrist and talks a lot about the gut-brain connection and nutrition and how it's involved. And so anyways, that's an important piece. And I don't want to spend all the day talking about that. So I just wanted to get out of the way, I think, because I just think it's complicated and there is a lot of stigma and there is a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding around mental health. So I kind of dove into that through the years because I found in my story, people didn't understand it. And even the same people that helped me figure out that I had some depression and some issues ended up being the same people that gaslit me like a decade later, being like, oh, you still have depression and depression never goes away. And all these weird things that actually aren't true, that are just kind of in the narrative in society or in the collective consciousness of society because of some weird articles people read or, you know, the stuff that sadly certain, you know, medical professionals are still purporting these certain ideas that are maybe just incomplete or based on some kind of bias. And
there's a lot we just don't know. And I think
that's true too.
People, coming from personal example, when I don't understand something, I generally have two options. I can go and deep dive into finding out answers to those questions, or I can, you know, maybe absorb some of the easier pieces of information about it. And in the midst of that, you know, it might cost me knowledge and information that would be really beneficial if I actually took some time to dive a little deeper. But you have to be willing to kind of seek out your sources and seek out information.
Yeah, well, and it's not easy when, there's a million different articles saying, you know, you can basically get whatever you want on any side of any argument. And that's why knowing the actual science and knowing how to pick apart a study or an article or knowing how to not get caught up by a headline is really hard. And it's easy to get, it's hard to decipher sometimes truth from, you know, some agenda driven.
Yeah.
It's a eye catcher.
Clickbait.
It's clickbait. There you go. Thank you. Clickbait. That's what I was looking for. But so anyways, that's kind of my experience. I had years of therapy. I still am a huge fan of therapy. I think therapy works for many reasons, but something that was illuminated recently, and I didn't even mean to say that word, but it's fitting because I think someone was talking about this in terms of therapy, like all therapy is exposure therapy, and how it brings things into the light. And I think that is part of the reason it's very healing and helpful.
Yeah.
And I do think talking about things can be very helpful, you know, depending on what the person's dealing with. But I found that in my experience with different depression, anxiety related symptoms, it was very helpful to have tools to navigate that through therapy, but also just putting things out into the light and getting that kind of exposure, even though it wasn't technically just exposure therapy. It was me letting things be known, and that was really helpful. So
two questions about that. So one being, when did you start to experience an opportunity to expose what you were experiencing with depression? And two, how for you does that exposure help you? How has that been a life source?
Yeah. I think I was able to experience that. I think in my early 20s, I was able to get some therapy, and that was really helpful. And how did that experience? What was the question? The second.
How did exposure?
Yeah. How did it
make a difference for you, or what does that do for you specifically? Because I can imagine, especially when it comes to depression or feeling down. Maybe that's one experience of that people recognize. I can imagine it being really hard to want to share. And if we're talking about suffering and going through pain, I see depression as an experience of pain. And then it's like exposing it seems another instance of pain. So how did that become something really valuable for you?
Well, I didn't really have the shame associated with it in terms that some people have, there's a stigma, right, around mental health oftentimes, and people feel weak and all this stuff. And that's never really been my thing where I've been like, oh, I'm afraid to show this part of myself or whatever. That's just not my struggle, I guess. And you know that. You're laughing.
You're blessed for that.
Well, it's just different.
And cursed. Cursed.
I have different struggles, but I think lying is not one of them, I guess. And I think so I want to figure out what's going on with me. I guess that's the thing. And I'm open to whatever that is. And so being guided to figure that out, or whatever it is when you do therapy, I think was helpful in the sense that someone's validating certain things and normalizing it in a way, but also being really respectful and helpful along the journey. It's almost like a guide through your mind, and giving you tools along the way on like catching, like cognitive behavioral therapy. It's like classic CBT stuff is there's just catching, okay, this is a thought that leads to an emotion that leads to an action. And it's like, oh, and then you can kind of start seeing patterns and things. And so all that was really helpful in its own way. But there's all kinds of different therapy out there, and you can talk more about what you've experienced with it, because we've gone through different kind of therapies actually. But yeah, I think, where were we? Oh, yeah.
Being a guide. So that exposure really guided you.
But I think something I was going to say too is just like, I think not being afraid to be in the light, to be honest, to be open really helped me throughout my life, and still helps me, because I think, I bust myself out. Sometimes I get myself in trouble by being honest, but I think ultimately I'm not keeping that stuff inside, and I don't therefore have to deal with it alone. And that was, I think, really, really helpful to just be in a comfortable space where I could share openly some of the, hardest emotions and thoughts and whatever it might be with someone. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. It is definitely a strength of yours, being able to put insight and even process for you. You're an outward processor. I'm very much an independent, silent processor. And those have their places, but those also create like a dynamic when it comes to mental health. That's really, I would say there's some differences in experiencing and healing.
Yeah. We'll talk a little bit about, since we're talking about it, tell me a little bit about your experience with it and what helped you.
Yeah. So I would say I have two times in my life that I've encountered mental health significantly. The first being having a family member and then family members who experienced depression and bipolar growing up. And so I had this for a long time. I had a very outward or maybe bystander experience with mental health. And for me, being young, I feel like this has shaped maybe part of my interest and curiosity, and I would hope compassion on others who go through mental health, because having a family member who was significantly impacted by mental health in a time when society didn't really talk about it, talking about stigma, there was such a stigma around depression and mental health that it wasn't talked about, similar to your experience being young and kid. And I learned early on to maybe see it as something to be embarrassed by and ashamed of, but also it created a lot of emotion and sadness, seeing people in pain and not being able to help as a young child. And thankfully, I had some people in my life that helped me, and when I was a teenager was learning about God, and I felt like that time helped me to actually ask more questions and start to connect with my family to understand the mental health and what that was doing to them. And that was a pretty big moment that shaped me as being able to understand that more was going on than I could see on the outside. And I think that stuck with me for a long time until more recently, when I've had to actually see my own challenges with anxiety. And that has been a struggle. That has been difficult as if you've ever, we've talked about Enneagrams before, the study of Enneagrams, and I'm a 3, which is, go do yourself a service and do a deep dive on Enneagrams and psychology, personality tests.
Yeah, that was actually really helpful, right? For you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I mean, I'm a psych major, so I'm very curious about why people function the way that they do. But for me, being a number 3, your worth comes from what you accomplish and what you do. And mental health seemed to be a barrier to what you could do, that it would limit what I can do. It gets in the way, an obstacle. And I think over the past year, I would say I've been doing therapy for maybe 2.5 years, but over the past year, it's been quite the journey of being able to recognize how much my mental health contributes to my gut health. And that's been a crazy experience, exploring that and starting to identify like how much my body wants to talk if I don't let my mind talk. And my anxiety comes from a lot of different places, whether that's people's perspective or my own personal drive to succeed and want to look good, and coming from a performance-based approval personality and family structure. All those things kind of played into this anxiety, and to the point,
had some traumatic experiences.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. And being in an environment, jobs in the past that were very built on performance and
high stress,
religious performance, looking good, and that can be really misleading too.
You've done a lot in the last couple of years for sure. I mean, as far as taking that on and seeing it, I remember, because at first you were a little more hesitant, you'd say, to
I was totally opposed to therapy. I was opposed to admit that I struggled with any type of mental health challenges. Yeah,
What was that when you look back now? Was it just you were afraid of trying to look at it? Was it a stigma thing for you of like, oh, that means I'm not good enough, or that means I'm this kind of person? Like, why was it hard to want to peel back the curtain for yourself and go, oh, maybe I do have some anxiety?
Yeah, I think it was hard for me to admit weakness, and I associated a mental health challenge with being a weakness. I thought that would mean I'm not good enough. It really played into me feeling inadequate. And I think that's really tied to stigma. I really think that's the way it has been viewed in the past. That if you have any challenges or difficulties personally, that's on you. It's like somehow, I don't know, that we see, I mean, Olympics are going on right now, and you see someone overcome obstacles of maybe they had an injury or maybe they've come from, rough experiences, and you go, oh yeah, but they overcame that. But if it's something within that person, it's a lot easier for me to blame myself or blame that person as not being good enough. And yeah, I think that was partly society made, maybe partly within just kind of my personality too and who I am.
Yeah. So for you, what has helped more specifically you were talking about the gut brain connection a bit, and what has helped you in the last several years, more specifically with whether it be therapy, and maybe you can get more specific around some of the changes you've made, but also, kind of revelations and things you've understood about yourself through this time, and what were some of the biggest, I guess, breakthroughs. And
yeah, I mean, I think first of all, reading really does help. I think reading books that maybe I don't even know if that totally relates to me, but I started reading books on gut health, and then on the body, and then on spiritual abuse, and on relationships. And those were super helpful just because they gave me language to understand, oh, maybe I'm not the only one, or, oh, that is exactly what I'm feeling and thinking. And I think those, places that can identify and make you feel seen are really helpful for then being able to explore more about what I was feeling and experiencing. Because yeah, there was part of me that was still really resistant to anxiety until I basically had kind of a panic attack on the light rail and at the beginning of our school year. And I realized, oh, something is truly sparking a warning here. But I really kind of needed books, and I listened to a lot of podcasts too of conversations and people sharing their experiences. And I think that was such an eye-opening time where I needed someone to acknowledge what I was going through, for me to admit what I was going through.
Yeah.
And, I think of the book Body Keeps the Score is a really popular one currently, and that one resonates with a lot of people. But that was also kind of a light into admitting and recognizing that something was going on in me. And then the other part of that was being able to write my own story and I'm an English teacher, so have an interest in reading and writing, but can doubt maybe that I want to do it, or that it takes a lot of effort, similar to what my students feel sometimes. And
it was emotional. It's an emotional process.
Exactly. It's very vulnerable, but writing was also so freeing for me, on top of obviously therapy was huge and beneficial, and having relationships around me that understood or supported me, like you've obviously been huge supporter through this time. But I would say, for other people experiencing challenges, starting with what do you know already and what do you not know, and then let that guide you.
Yeah, it is really helpful. Reading and writing I've found to be very, very helpful. And having, like you were saying, a specific words and being able to name your experience and understand what's happening is it can't be overstated. I think, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think you've come a long way, and we're still on a journey, but I was remembering
Definitely.
You were taking me back to some of that, when I just have to say that when I met Courtney, she had like 4 jobs at once. And I think, and that just to kind of show how much you were running yourself around and not slowing down. And one of the things we've been doing, actually, that makes me think about slowing down, is we've been doing Sabbath for a couple of years now and practicing that,
Yeah.
where we really don't work for 24 hours and focus on God more. We connect more, and we
Go out in
delight.
nature.
Yeah, we rest, we delight, we
Worship.
Yeah, all that stuff, and just get grateful for what we have, and we put our phones away. We don't email. We don't do all the things, and it was really hard for us to get started. And it was funny because we argued about it.
I fought Cameron.
Yeah, we argued about it for the first 2 months.
I had emails to send.
Yeah, Court couldn't not send an email so we started with like a 4-hour situation, and then it turned into 24 hours, and but I think that was part of the catalyst that really helped us to forced ourselves to slow down, right?
So true.
I didn't have as much of a problem chilling, but you had a little bit more hard time slowing down in terms of like with your own thoughts. And
right.
I think being able to humble out and wrestle with your own kind of thoughts and everything really brought things to the surface and helped us to even make this move to Seattle and make a bunch of changes in our life that we'll get into in further episodes. But I think it's really helped both of our mental health. I think the slowing down, because I can be as busy as anyone, even if I'm not a 4 jobs kind of guy, but I can space out or just numb out on media or whatever, or like anybody. But it's these things that keep us busy and distracted, and then we're never really having that boredom or whatever that would be, to like that downtime where you literally can't distract yourself, and that's when things come to the surface. And I think that's important. I think that we nowadays, and I want to go on a lecture, I think everyone knows this, there's just so many distractions that keep you from just being like, I don't know, one of my favorite quotes is Blaise Pascal said, "All man's problems stem from his inability to sit alone in a room in silence." And it's like,
wow,
I feel like that's so true, because what's plaguing you? What are your demons? And if we can't actually fight those, overcome those, understand those, then we are going to project those and be destructive in our own ways, because everyone's got stuff. And even if it's not like this bona fide mental health, crises or disorder or whatever, people have issues and trauma and things in their life. And there's all these words that are getting thrown around now, right? Like trauma is a big one where people are maybe using it when they shouldn't, but ultimately a lot of people do have stuff. And whether it's big deal or little deal or whatever, big T or little T, there's stuff that everybody's gone through in their life. Like nobody gets through this thing unscathed, but the same person can go through, 2 different people can go through the same thing and have completely different outcomes. And why is that? And I just think there's so much to that. And that's where, I want to get into the spiritual side at some point in this conversation, but but that, I don't know if you have thoughts on what I'm saying, because I'm just rambling.
Oh no, I love that you bring up rest, because I do think that has been one of the most powerful, I don't know the word, powerful tools. I don't even think of it as a tool, but just a necessity for facing suffering. I think we have to be able to, as you say, sit with whatever that pain is or difficulty is. And I think I'm totally restless. I'm a restless person. But we noticed the other day that I also love this artistic side of myself when I can sing and don't care no one's in the room, and just do my own thing. And I think part of that is because we're not trying to be anything for anyone there. We're just ourselves. And sometimes that rest is a place to just be yourself, but it's hard to face sometimes that we're in pain or we're having difficulty or expectations. Things haven't turned out the way that we thought they would. there's a lot of ways, and we haven't really defined this, but there are a lot of ways to suffer, right? There's a lot of ways we can experience suffering. And that could be literal, physical. That could be, as we're talking about, mental health. That could be loss of someone. That could be hurt from relationships or people, physical, emotional, etc. And to have to admit that it is painful is probably one of the most difficult parts, at least for me. You know, I think that is what propels me into restlessness continually. But I think if we were a society that wanted to slow down and sit, we would have the ability to sit with ourselves and then sit with others.
Right. And I do think, just a kind of a higher level too, I love what you're saying, because there's something profoundly wrong in society nowadays, like, because the amount of mental health has increased, exponentially. I don't know the exact numbers. Like I said, I don't want this podcast to be like a statistics podcast and all this, but it's crazy. Everyone knows it. It's not just this younger generation. There's loneliness. We're living in a very unique time, and a time that's very fraught with a lot of illness, whether mental, physical, and those things are not unrelated. But there's also a social component and a spiritual component. And I think people are starting to wake up to these things being all connected. And so I just wanted to say that slowing down is a huge deal, but it's very countercultural. There's this intentionality that you need to bring to understanding yourself, your mind, your body. And there's certain things that are intuitive that at least used to be or should be intuitive that aren't as much anymore, because we've kind of lost touch. Like, we have become emojis. We've cut our heads off from our body. We're not thinking holistically. Yeah. We're not understanding that we're running ourselves ragged a lot of the time in all these different ways, right? And I know I have a couple of really close friends who have struggled with mental health for a long time, and it's complicated. I don't want to oversimplify it or anything, but I do know they eat terribly, and when you look at the sources of the people I just said, you can look at, they have all the data. I can link some of these videos, and where they're showing, the difference in people in a matter of days or weeks when they just do dietary intervention. And so I just want to say that there's a lot of hope out there. I've struggled with chronic challenges, and I think there is answers. And I think that's the thing I want people to know from this. And it's not just one place. It's not just a diet thing. It's not just a lifestyle thing. It's not just, because I know that's not easy. It's not just, go eat different. It's like, these things are difficult, but there's so many answers out there and so much help that does exist. And I think without that, I wouldn't be here, because something bad would have happened by now, because I couldn't stay in that state forever. And I think having hope and getting answers is a big part of it, but also understanding what to do with suffering. And I think that's what these further episodes that we're going to get into, we're going to talk about. We're going to dive into more of these questions of, okay, well, why do we have to go through this? And, if there is a God, why does he allow suffering? And these kind of like age old questions that are like, or, okay, well, and maybe I do have faith, but why am I not healed? Or maybe, I've been struggling with this for 20, 30 years and nothing's changed. What do you do then? Like, there's hard situations out there and hard diagnoses. And so once again, we're not making light of anything. I think we're just sharing our experience, but also I want to say that we're going to dive into with people we interview, with different movies and art and things that we're going to review and talk about that speak on some of these deeper themes with biblical passages. I want to dive into that more too in coming episodes, because that's something that we've both gotten a lot of help from. And so, yeah, I think just know that that's all coming. But for now, we just wanted to kind of share in this first 2 episodes, what we're going through, what we've gone through, and what we're still going through in a lot of ways. You know, I still struggle with sleep on any given day. You know, I am not motivated to do much, and that's hard. It's hard to do a podcast or do my job, or, you know, and I think that's also the fear and the stigma around some of this stuff. And that it's like, you know, I've applied to jobs before, and it's like, do you have mental health? And you're like, what? Like, what are they going to make of this? And that whole, I don't know, just the societal understanding around it, I think is very flawed and there's a lot of ignorance. And I think around these complicated issues, there needs to be a lot of compassion and a lot of understanding, and there should be more resources, I guess, for people. And so hopefully giving you a few resources in this episode help and get you down a path of figuring out something, and giving you even just a few breadcrumbs down that path, to hopefully better health in general. And I know a lot of it's worked for me and helped, and we're still on our journey. And
yep. Still following our own breadcrumbs.
Yeah. And, but I think having hope and having friends and being able to talk about this has been really helpful. And so
you're not alone.
True. So, but we love y'all. Thank you for listening. I'm going to go take a nap.
Peace. Like a set. Can we have like a set?
Let me intro it without you interrupting. Is that cool?
Last time you didn't do a lead in it. It was really helpful. It just made it normal.
I know.
And like now, I thought we wanted.
We talked for 10 minutes, and then I just used a clip in the middle of it, but I don't have time for that.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're just gonna go into it.
Thanks for your honesty.
You're now pro. So